My parents kicked me out and made my 24-year-old nephew the CEO because he is smart like his mother after running the family business for 12 years. Now, after he wrecked the company, they are begging for my help. Hey Reddit, I've always thought of myself as a reasonably calm guy, but lately I've started doubting everything. That all began during my dad's 65th birthday celebration. One minute I'm celebrating, the next my life is spiraling downward. For some background, I have spent the previous 12 years working for my dad's real estate company. Long hours, 12 years of commitment, and ground-up business creation. I honestly felt I was in line to inherit someday. It simply made sense. You labor, prove yourself, and finally you will be able to manage the show. Family, friends, business partners, the entire 9 yards. The celebration was a grand occasion. Like their other celebrations, my parents enjoy a nice one. Everyone was having a great time. The food was fantastic. The drinks were running. And then arrived the dreadful toast. My dad got up, and I knew it would be typical. Some jokes, some sincere thanks, maybe a remark about how he was looking forward to retirement. Rather, he let off a bomb. After much thought, I will be retiring in a few months, he said. And I've decided to hand the CEO batons to someone I think will propel this company forward. My grandson, Ethan. I froze. Did I hear correctly? Ethan? The young man had zero real-world experience and was 24 straight out of business school, and he was slated to be chief executive. Of the business I had devoted more than 10 years to, my heart and soul had been poured into. Though to me it seemed like a chorus of nails on a chalkboard, the room burst in cheers. My heart thumping in my chest, I felt as though I might be sick. Though I attempted to act straightforward, emotionally I was enraged. Not to misunderstand, I did not object to Ethan. When we spoke at family get-togethers, he was a pleasant enough youngster, but he was young and inexperienced. He had no idea what operating a business meant, and I knew that since I had been the one practically running it for years. Ethan had only a fancy degree, and my parents' unquestioning faith. Everyone returned to mixing after the toast, but I couldn't understand what had just transpired. To see me, my wife Sarah dropped over. She questioned what was wrong right away, hence I may have appeared to be seeing a ghost. I merely shook my head and advised her we would discuss it later. I had to decide just what the devil I was going to do. Later that evening, once the festivities had subsided and the home was quiet, I went up to my dad. I reasoned that perhaps there was a misinterpretation, that I would still be quite involved, something to help explain this crazy choice. No, yet he turned back twice. Given Ethan's youth, fresh ideas, and business degree, he informed me he thought he was the right candidate. Terrible degree. Over a decade, I was the one who had developed relationships with clients, oversaw the staff, and handled daily operations. You can still work with him, mentor him, show him the ropes, he even said, gallingly. And that was all. I told him straight then, and there I couldn't stay. After all I had done for the business, I could not see myself working under Ethan. Now it was more about principle than about rank or money. I had qualified for that post. I deserved it. And hearing I wasn't even given thought felt like a slap in the face. The next several days passed in a haze. Saying I was acting dramatically and that I should consider the family, my parents tried to talk me out of giving up. I could not see it any other way, though. There was no use in staying if they didn't regard my work enough to assign me the position I had been aiming for. I thus packed my office, turned in my resignation, and left. One of the worst things I have ever done was walk out of that workplace one last time. I had spent so many years there, knowing every inch of the area, the good and the terrible. For me, it was a part of life rather than only a job. Though I knew I had to, leaving felt like amputation of a limb. Staying would have been far worse. Sarah was really encouraging. She said she appreciated my choice and felt great pride in me for defending myself. She understood how much this hurt, but she also realized I couldn't remain in an environment where I was undervalued. Since it felt as though the whole of my family was against me, that support meant the world to me. My mother persisted in phoning, imploring me to think again. Trying to persuade me to return, my dad even showed up at my residence unannounced. But my response was the same, no. Every time they asked. The sense of betrayal turned out to be the toughest. I used to be close to my dad, particularly when we first launched the business. Now it felt like he was tossing me away. I gave up my own career path to help him create his dream. And for what purpose? Some foolish belief that Ethan's degree defined him as the future. It made no sense at all. I never heard from Ethan personally once I departed. My parents persisted, hence I'm not sure if he desired the job or if he merely went along with it. In either case, it was meaningless. The damage was done. Now I had to make my decision. My parents had decided theirs. The first several weeks after stopping were difficult. I kept going back over the chat with my dad and my thoughts, wondering whether there was anything I might have done better. Still, every time I came to the same conclusion, I made the right call. I could not have waited on the sidelines chewing my tongue and watched Ethan fumble his way through running the business. It now concerned my self-respect rather than only me. 6 months later, here I was still attempting to put my life together. Keeping my distance from my family, I was concentrating on planning my next move. And as much as it stung to acknowledge it, I felt leaving was the finest thing I could have done. I had no need to stick around if they couldn't recognize my value. I thought I would have cleansed my hands of the family business permanently when I quit. Was not interested in considering it, learning about it, or even being reminded it existed. But life throws curveballs, especially when family members are involved. Notwithstanding my best attempts, word of the company and Ethan's terrible leadership kept finding its way to me. It started out with little things first. Not because it was hilarious, but more because it was so predictable. A friend who still worked there emailed me, "Dude, Ethan just fired 3 senior employees because they didn't vibe with his vision." I chuckled. Ethan knew absolutely nothing about what he was doing. Having worked with us from the early days, those staff members knew the company from top to bottom. Losing them felt like amputating a limb and hoping to run a marathon. Then I learned he was altering our contracts in some audacious ways. Though Ethan was tinkering with deals that had been in place for years, relationships I had diligently cultivated and nurtured, I am all for creativity. Frustrated and bewildered, customers started to leave. Still, my folks stayed by him. "He's just adjusting," my mother advised a friend. "It's all part of the process." Indeed, managing a company into the ground follows a pattern. The true kickback came later: financial fraud. I honestly don't wish to delve into the nitty-gritty. I know not all the specifics. From what I heard, though, Ethan sought to inflate our figures in order to wow a major client. Young error. Though all he did was wave a gigantic red flag screaming, "Audit me," he most likely felt he was being clever. The results were instantaneous and severe. The company's name was completely damaged. Customers started to leave en masse, and lawsuits began to mount up. Learning about all this seemed like slow-motion viewing a train disaster. I felt justified on one hand. I told my parents Ethan wasn't ready, but they hadn't paid attention. Seeing something I had worked so hard to create fall apart in such a brief period of time hurt, though. Though I wanted not to pay attention, I couldn't help it. For 12 years, that firm had been my life. It was like seeing someone use your own 2 hands to swing a sledgehammer against a house you built. Not one of them surprised me. Ethan never felt ready to take front stage. Never having had to fight for anything, the man grew up with a silver spoon in his mouth. He exuded this conceit, as if he could just go into any circumstance and sort things out as he went. In the actual world, it wouldn't work. In a classroom, that may. Business doesn't give second thoughts about your GPA or last name. It is not forgiving, and Ethan was discovering that way too slowly. Not one person else noticed it approaching. Former colleagues called and texted me, folks I hadn't spoken to in months. One guy remarked, "Man, we miss you around here." Another told me, "It's a mess without you. I don't know how much longer I can stick around. The place feels like a sinking ship." It was pleasing, sure, but also conflicting. Years of working with these people I had trusted and supported, were evidence of their consistency. Hearing them suffer made me want to help, but I knew better than to become involved. Not about to swoop in and tidy Ethan's mess. My employment changed to reflect that. Still, it was my parents' handling of it all that really got me. They explained Ethan away rather than making him answerable. "He's under a lot of pressure. my mother remarked upon someone inquiring about the fraud allegations. Just needs time to establish his footing. Time? In less than 6 months, the man had virtually wrecked the business. He needed how much more time? Not to overlook my sister either. Acting like he was some sort of misunderstood genius, she was Ethan's most enthusiastic supporter through all of this. I'm not sure if she was just too proud to own she had made a mistake or really insane. In either case, it infuriated me. She had argued for Ethan to be appointed CEO, persuaded my parents it was the appropriate action, and now she was doubling down on her disastrous choice. Mostly I stayed out of it, but one day I gave in. At the grocery store, I came across an old family friend who said casually how great it must be to see the next generation running the company. They chuckled when I simply grinned and remarked, "Exciting isn't exactly the word I would use." I wasn't kidding. Watching the corporation implode was strangely gratifying. It was like all the annoyance and resentment I had experienced when they passed Ethan over was being confirmed. I hadn't gone insane, not overreacting here. Now they were paying the cost of a major error they had committed. Said another way, I didn't enjoy their failure. I had moved on, at least in theory. I had begun to generate concepts for my own company, something I could create from the bottom up free from outside intervention. Sarah was quite helpful, pushing me to leap and act for myself. Though frightening, it was also exciting. I sensed for the first time in years that I had influence over my own future. My parents were juggling in parallel. From the grapevine, I learned they were attempting to repair client trust and control damage. With it, good fortune. Particularly in the commercial sector, once trust is damaged, it is almost tough to rebuild. And they had more pressing issues to handle as litigation mounted. About Ethan, I had no idea how he was doing things. Since I quit, I hadn't spoken to him. To be honest, I didn't give a damn. From what I heard, though, he was over his head. While some believed he was on the brink of a collapse, others said he was still trying to seem as though he had it all under control. In either case, it was no longer my concern. 6 months later, the business was hardly a shell of its former self. My parents were in great need, clients were leaving in numbers, and staff members were leaving as well. Though they hadn't contacted me yet, I figured it wouldn't be long. And when they did, I had already decided what I would say. 6 months after I left the family company, the unavoidable happened. Though I had been preparing myself for it, when I saw my parents standing on my front door, I felt a flood of contradictory feelings. They were more anxious than I had ever seen them and older. My dad seemed to be in uncomfortable tension. He knew he had no option but felt he did not want to be there. But her demeanor captured it all. Desperation. I invited them not right soon. Though I honestly wanted to close the door in their faces, I refrained. My dad inquired, his voice reluctant. "Can we come in?" I moved aside silently. Then they shuffled in. One could cut with a knife the thick enough tension in the room. Having been in the kitchen, Sarah peered at me but said nothing. She understood that moment was approaching as well. She left me to cope with it, softly slipping upstairs. Arms crossed, I sat down across from them, waiting for them to begin. As usual, my mother stepped right in. Her voice faltering, "We need your help," she pleaded. "The business is," she said, hesitating as stating it out loud might aggravate things. "It's in trouble. Mike made some big mistakes." I silence. I merely watched her, allowing the stillness to extend. She obviously expected me to close the void and leap in to provide a fix. I skipped. At last my dad spoke up. Admitting he was in over his head and clutching his temple as though he had a headache, and now the company is facing lawsuits, losing clients? We're hardly hanging on. I have considered this moment many times since I stopped. I had pictured people approaching me, begging me to change things, and me laughing in their faces. But now that it was actually happening, I became more irritated than anything. It lacked validity or satisfaction. It was only sad. "And what do you expect me to do about it?" I questioned at last, my voice flat. I wanted them to wriggle a little. They were deserving of it. My mother stretched forward and rested her hand on mine. "You know the business better than everyone," she replied. "We want you to come back. Please." Her comments really stung more than I anticipated. For years, All I wanted was for them to acknowledge my worth and own role in keeping the business viable. And now here they were, almost urging me to save them. It did not, however, feel like a triumph. It felt as though an insult. They still expected me to tidy their mess in the end. I responded, drawing my hand away. "Why don't you ask Ethan? Let him fix it. He is the CEO, right?" "Ethan can't handle it," my dad remarked, his voice tinged with irritation. "We made a mistake. We see now, but this is about the company, about everything we have created." "Everything I have built," I corrected. "You threw me aside like I was nothing. I am the one who spent 12 years making that company what it is." Leaning back in his chair, my dad moaned greatly. He seemed worn out and demoralized. "We felt we were acting ethically," he stated. "We thought Ethan would bring something fresh to the table, but you were right. He wasn't ready. Now we're paying the price." Hearing him say that ought to have felt great, but it didn't. It simply made me more furious. They knew Ethan was not ready. Over and over I had told them. Still, they had not paid attention, and right now they wanted me to gather the bits. My mother murmured gently, "I'm sorry," tears filling her eyes. "We were wrong, but it's not too late. You can still correct this." I got up and paced the space, rising in voice. "You want me to fix it?" I asked. "You think I can just walk back in there and magically make everything better? Do you even hear yourselves? You didn't trust me before, but now you're desperate. I'm suddenly good enough?" They said nothing, and the quiet further stoked my resentment. "Do you even understand what you're asking?" I said. "You're asking me to put my life on hold again, to bail you out from a situation you created. And for what? So you can pat me on the back and tell me, 'Good job, kid,' before throwing me under the bus again? That is not what this is," my dad declared with great conviction. "This is about saving our legacy as well as the company." "Your legacy," I back off. "Not mine, not nowadays." Then my mother began to cry. Then she was totally sobbing into her hands. Like he had no idea what to do, my dad sat there staring at the floor, and for a brief period I felt terrible. In all senses, they were my parents. But then I thought of the humiliation, the treachery, the many late evenings I had spent working while they were off celebrating Ethan for his marks. That infuriated me more than their tears could ever mellow. "I can't help you," I answered steadily at last. "I won't. I've already started working on my own plans. I'm building something for myself now, and I'm not going to toss that away to clean your mess." My dad raised his head, his expression stiffening. "So that is it? You are simply going to turn your back on your family?" I laughed. It sounded like bitterness. "You turned your back on me first. Don't try to guilt me into this. It won't work." They departed shortly after that. My dad looked like he wanted to quarrel but lacked the energy, and my mom still smelled. I shook a little as soon as the door closed behind them. Sarah came downstairs and encircled me with her arms. "You did the right thing," she declared. "You have nothing to owe them." She was correct, naturally. That is known. Still, it aches. It had been difficult enough to be leaving the firm. Walking away from my folks seemed much more difficult, but I could not turn around. Not right now. Hardly ever. That evening, as I lay in bed, I considered what they had said about repairing things and salvaging the business. Not for them, but for myself. For the individuals who had worked with me, the clients who had trusted me. Part of me wanted to. Still, another side of me realized it was no longer my responsibility. Now, they had to live with the decision they had taken. That evening I nodded off, more sure than ever. I had no intention of returning. It was time to start forward. Something changed inside me after my parents arrived at my front door. Clarity I had not had in months. I turned my attention forward instead. I had wasted too much time boiling over what had happened, revisiting the betrayal, the disappointment, the rage. But after slamming that door on them, metaphorically and literally, I knew it was time to start thinking ahead. I had to create something of my own if I weren't returning to their firm. Starting from nothing is intimidating, especially with knowledge of what you are doing. I didn't have a nice crew or a large office. Hell, at first I didn't even have a solid plan. All I had were the abilities I had developed over 12 years, and the fierce will to show myself, perhaps somewhat for them, that I could do this. Deciding the type of company I wanted to start came first. I knew just real estate, hence that aspect made perfect sense. Still, I wanted to replicate my dad's company not only exactly. I wanted to make something different, better still. Over the years, I had acquired not only knowledge about the industry, but also about treating people, clients, staff, and everyone. My parents had always handled the company like a machine, running sales without any thought given to the people behind them. I yearned to create something more intimate and human. I began by contacting a small number of my former clients. Years of working with these people who trusted me, have defined me. I said I was beginning my own project and asked whether they would be interested in collaborating once more. Most of them surprised and relieved me with their enthusiasm. "We were wondering when you would get back in the game," one of them remarked. "Ethan's been a disaster. We have been waiting for someone to take leadership." Their answers provided the confidence I required. Should they believe in me, perhaps I could pull this off at last. Still, finding customers on board was only one component of the jigsaw. I also called for a crew. The firm wasn't going to run itself. That brought in my former colleagues. After I left, I had stayed in touch with a few of them and knew some were dissatisfied under Ethan's direction. I began phoning one by one. "Hey, I'm gathering something together," I said to them. "It's small right now, but I have promise. Are you interested?" The answers were practically all positive. Many of them had already left my dad's business, bored with the anarchy and incompetence. Looking for something different, they were between jobs. "I'm in," responded one of them right away. "I've been looking forward to this call." I had a small but competent crew a few weeks later. Our office was simple, just a communal workstation with lots of energy, not sophisticated equipment or design. It felt like the early years of my dad's company, when we were hungry and frugal. This time, though, it was my vision, my guidelines. Starting the company was a whirlwind. I hardly had time to relax between company registration, website creation, and marketing ourselves. However, it was thrilling. Every little victory, a client signing on, a lead closing into a sale, seemed like a huge success. I was creating something, not only working, it was the first time in years. It felt amazing as well. Of course, things were not all perfect sailing. There were times when I wondered whether I was chewing off more than I could handle. Sometimes the stress of handling everything, finances, logistics, client relationships, was debilitating. Still, I reminded myself each time I felt like giving up why I was doing this. I was proving to myself that I could, not only launching a company. Juggling a job and personal life proved to be among the toughest obstacles. Though I knew it wasn't easy for her, Sarah was really encouraging. Often working late into the night, she was working full-time while I concentrated all of my efforts on the company. She cautioned me one night, "You're going to burn out if you keep this up," as I sat slumped over my laptop reading contracts. I knew. I rubbed my temples. But it never takes off if I don't push now. She said nothing, but I could see worry in her eyes. It was a sobering reminder that preserving the life we had created together was just as vital as developing the company. Though I wasn't sure exactly yet, I mentally noted to find a better balance. Weeks passed, and everything began to line up. Our first several trades went without a hitch, and client comments were overwhelmingly favorable. "This feels like the old days," one of them said, "when things were simpler, more personal. I miss this." That gave me validation. I was working on something right. The company started to expand. Though it was steady rather than dramatic development, that was plenty for me. I couldn't ignore the rumors concerning my dad's business meanwhile. On the street, word of mouth was that things were getting worse from bad. The lawsuits were mounting while they were losing clients straight away. Not feeling a touch of gratification was difficult. After all, I had advised them. Mostly, though, I was sorry for the staff and clientele caught in the crossfire. They were deserving of more. The number of those clients and staff members beginning to show up for me truly shocked me. Not initially, at least not actively sought either. Word went out, though, that I was beginning my own project, and people contacted me. "Let me know whether you're looking for more staff," remarked a former colleague. "We've always trusted you." "Let's talk," another client emailed me, stating, I can't stand it there anymore. They were approaching me. I was not poaching them. To be honest, it felt fantastic. These were folks who appreciated me and sought to collaborate with me because of what I offered. That contrasted sharply with how my family had handled me. We had outgrown our shared workspace by the end of the second month and began looking for a suitable office. Though tiny, it felt like a major milestone. I grinned as I stood in that vacant area and considered the opportunities. All of it was mine. Nobody could pull it from me. I was flourishing, not only surviving, and for the first time in a very long time, I felt really free. Story 2. From the outside, my life looked to be really ideal. Married to Sarah, she's 36, for 5 years. I am 38, an engineer with a 6-figure salary. Lily, 7, and Emily, 5, have 2 wonderful, beautiful daughters. Our house is large. Our yard spans the whole 9 yards with a swing set. Since I started my current position, which is fantastic, Sarah hasn't had to work. I've even been helping her mother and teenage sister, who have been living with us for the past few years. Behind the white picket fence, though, things were not quite perfect. I had been drifting apart from Sarah for some time. The spark vanished, replaced with an increasing list of irritations and conflicts. I could see us drifting apart. Thus, in April, I at last persuaded Sarah to try marriage counseling. Since virtually every week, we have been visiting almost weekly. Honestly, it has opened eyes. Seeing how my workaholic habits and emotional isolation were affecting her, I resolved myself to be a better husband and father. I assume Sarah shared the same view. October then required me to spend a few weeks on a work trip. A friend of mine dropped a bombshell while I was away. Sarah was hanging around with a man called Jake a lot of the time. I had only seen Jake once, allegedly a friend of one of Sarah's friends. That was all. When I heard this news, I spun out. That night, I scheduled the next trip home. Sarah seemed unusual when she picked me up at the airport. Far away, not particularly thrilled to see me. I stated I missed her and the kids, but I acted cool. She returned home almost directly to bed. I stayed up, and once she fell asleep, I took her phone, something I never would have thought of doing. Though you can call it a gut sense, you know something is wrong when your partner starts carrying their phone everywhere, including the restroom. Opening the text messages, I came over Jake's name in her contacts. My gut sank. They texted nonstop, perhaps more than 20 messages a day. I got Sarah waking and insisted on an explanation. She denied everything, naturally. She said, "Only pals," and she removed the mail since she knew I would overreact. True indeed. Over the next few weeks, my misgivings mounted. I began poring over her phone records, fixating on every call and SMS. I was going insane over it. At last, I faced her and advised her to cut off any communication with Jake. I even personally visited Jake to implore him man-to-man to respect my marriage and back off. He nodded, and Sarah appeared to quit calling and messaging him at least. Then I saw her data consumption rising. Messenger on Facebook. She was still avoiding any communication with Jake. Although she was hooked to her phone even more now, I thought I might be developing paranoia. I resolved to try to let everything go, emphasizing being the husband and father I ought to have been all along. I started being more present, less worried about my job, and more involved with the kids. To help even, I started doing the kids and my own laundry. I attempted to demonstrate her enthusiasm for her interests, including her horse that I had purchased some years ago. Hoping it would provide her something to be passionate about outside of the house. I even helped her search for equestrian industry jobs. Then arrived the birthday celebration night for her brother. The day was January 15th. We had a large supper with all her relatives and friends. Most of them thereafter went to a pub next door, but I stayed behind at the restaurant with one of Sarah's cousins. That is when the manager came up to me carrying Sarah's phone. There it had been left behind. If I knew who it belonged to, he asked. My heart began to beat. Opening her Facebook app, I found messages between Sarah and Jake. Lovey-dovey material, discussing their missing each other. She swore she would never take off her jacket since she missed his scent on it. She said of him, "My one and only." It made me nauseous. We were both stunned when her cousin also noticed the messages. Sarah ultimately admitted she felt something for Jake, but vowed they never slept together when I challenged her. Twice claimed she said, "just kissed." I told her I trusted nothing she said and I didn't believe her. Deep down, I did believe her regarding not sleeping with him, but I wasn't ready to tell her that. She blamed me for everything and said she went to Jake since I had ignored her for years. Around me, my planet was collapsing. I felt deceived, furious, and like a total moron. I wanted neither a divorce nor to be married to someone who didn't love me. She declared she wanted things worked out, but I really didn't know what I wanted anymore. She seemed to be striving to prove she didn't need me, to discover herself. Though I loved her, I was beginning to believe that maybe the only way she would have ever valued what we had was through loss. Alternatively, at least some of it. The days following the birthday celebration melted together. I thought I was dazedly going around. The treachery, the resentment, the uncertainty, all too much. I called a lawyer as I had to straighten my skull. Starting with the reality that I had to return home, he provided me some wise advice. Apparently, Sarah could try to use my abandonment clause, which exists in my state, against me should I distance myself. I thus packed a bag and settled into the basement. Felt strange, like a foreigner in my own house. The attorney also advised me I might not have to pay alimony as I had a solid case for infidelity. Of course, child support, but not 1 penny more for Sarah. He also advised me out of the blue not to sleep with her. That would seem to be condoning the affair, thereby undermining my case. Who knows? Protection of my finances came next. I canceled all of our joint credit cards, changed my direct deposit, and started a new bank account. For extra precaution, I even set up credit monitoring. The difficult part came when Sarah's mother and sister needed to choose a new place to reside. I told the agent I listed the house. They would have to sort things out once it sold. About any of this, Sarah was not pleased. She eventually found employment working for her uncle's moving firm, but I knew it wasn't because of some newly acquired drive to help. I revoked her gas card and told her I no longer paid for her horse. She runs a Lexus SUV, and filling that thing full isn't cheap. I made every effort to protect the girls from the turmoil through it all. There was no battling in front of them. I made sure they got all they needed. The knowledge that it wasn't my fault was one positive outcome of all this. Sarah broke our vows and was the one who had to mend things. The next several months rode like a roller coaster. I struggled simply getting out of bed in the morning and was miserable and angry. I skipped more days than I ought to have and struggled going to work. I wanted Sarah to experience the suffering she had given me. I also wanted retribution. Originally, we agreed on a monthly child support payment far higher than what I was legally required to pay. Nevertheless, I felt bad and wanted to make sure the kids were looked after. All we had to do was sign a separation agreement my attorney created. About 45 minutes outside the city, Sarah came upon a great rental house with decent schools. It looked like a good fix, since I assumed she couldn't afford anything nearer. One of the agreement's typical clauses forbade unrelated overnight guests of the opposite sex, while the children were present. Basically, no girlfriends at my house when the girls were with Sarah, and no boyfriends sleeping over when she was away. Right. Sounds reasonable. Right. Sarah had Jake sleeping over several evenings a week within a week of moving into her new apartment before we even signed the agreement. She then tried to convince the girls to lie to me about it, therefore aggravating things further. That is it. I seized. I told Sarah the new deal. I was going for everything, and she would get the minimal legal child support. I phoned my lawyer and changed the separation agreement offer. Not 1 cent more. She took some time to understand I was serious, but today she's struggling to pay her bills. Not to misinterpret, the females receive good treatment. I get their food, clothing, toys, all they require. Simply said, I no longer directly hand Sarah the money. She still lacks legitimate employment. Says she is looking, but really I have no interest. Her issue right now is this. For me, I needed somewhere to release all the resentment and annoyance. I discovered CrossFit at this point. It has literally been a lifeline. I feel more confident than I have ever felt and am in the best shape of my life. Then something unanticipated occurred. I had someone. Olivia is her name, and she really is fantastic. Smart, successful, elegant, aspirational, essentially the reverse of Sarah. That is, I suppose, what pulled me to her. She was cool with me from the beginning, as I was clear from the first that I wasn't ready for a committed relationship. We have something unique, and it's helping me to heal. Meeting Olivia marked a sea change. someone to lean on, someone to be close with, someone to chat with. I began to feel joyful once more. And the craziest thing is also, my friendship with Sarah did really get better. We co-parent the girls, have regular conversations, and give their needs top priority. Though I still despise what she did, and will never forget it, since she is the mother of my children, we have to find a way to get along. No, we're not getting back together. I could never believe her once more. Still, we can be polite, even cordial, though I will never be able to get over some things. Similar to Jake. I told Sarah I never even acknowledged his existence, never would accept him. Everyone benefits most from him staying far away from me. That evening at Sarah's brother's birthday celebration 8 months ago is still fresh. 8 months after my universe collapsed. Looking back, it has been an insane ride. The depression hung over me for some time, a black cloud. But therapy, time, and the encouragement of friends and family, including AmITheA, started me to come out of the fog. The resentment directed at Sarah has subsided to a kind of bland acceptance. With the girls, we have found a schedule. I wanted them to spend most of their time with me. They do just that. We try our best to co-parent. Sarah sees them often. Though it's not always easy, we manage it. Over this entire process, I have grown quite self-aware. I used to be so preoccupied with my job and supporting my family that I overlooked the emotional side of life. I paid the cost and took Sarah for granted. But I am evolving. I participate more actively with my daughters now. I'm starting to give the things that really count top priority. AmITheA has been a rock across all of this. She is compassionate, patient, and never presses me to proceed faster than I am ready to. We have a close relationship. I envision her in a future. I'm slowing down, though, making sure I avoid repeating prior errors. Of course, one still experiences sorrowful times, events when I yearn for the life I knew. But then I see my girls and the incredible woman I am creating a new life with, and I know I am headed in the right direction. Though I'll never forget what she did, I've even started to forgive Sarah. She still has a lot of maturing to go, but I hope she discovers pleasure finally. Not with Jake exactly. For all I want, that guy can rot in hell. Life seems to toss curveballs in your path. Still, your reaction to those curveballs will define you. I'm not the man I was a year ago. I am stronger, wiser, and more resolved than I have ever been to lead a life full of love, laughter, and real connection. And that narrative is one worth telling. I hadn't shared my tale in some time. Life keeps marching forward, and right now I am in a far better place. The hurt of Sarah's treachery has softened and been replaced with peace and thanks for the fresh life I'm creating. I have a great relationship with AmITheA. She is smart, caring, and supportive. Everything I have ever desired in a companion. We have a close relationship. I can really say I'm happier than I have ever been. The girls love her, and she has been a fantastic inspiration for them. Co-parenting with Sarah is shockingly easy. Both of us have grown and given our kids' needs top priority. We have honest and polite conversations, and I'm happy we could provide Lily and Emily a safe and loving home. This process has taught me so much. I see now that my marriage broke down in part due to me. Emotionally absent, I put my job over my family. I now value communication, openness, and really appreciating the people I love. The resentment I formerly harbored toward Sarah has vanished. Like me, she seems now like an imperfect human being who made mistakes. Though I wish her well, I also welcome her being out of my life. I have found AmITheA to be the one who loves me totally. I deserve someone like that. Looking back, I'm glad for the difficulties I've encountered. They have improved my manhood, my fathering, and my marriage. I no longer find vulnerability or emotional expression frightening. I now value the present moment and know to welcome the uncertainty of life. One thing I would want to tell anybody who might be going through a similar experience is not to give up. At the tunnel's end, there is some illumination. Though right now it seems impossible, you will recover, grow, and rediscover happiness. My narrative provides evidence of the human spirit's resilience. Each of us is capable of overcoming hardship and leading a life full of love, delight, and purpose. And that is a truth one should hang on to.